There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and another Friday Reads. I've got lots of good stuff to tell you. I've got the good, the bad, and the ugly. Is that right? I think that's about right in terms of my reading week. And I've had a fabulously bookish week otherwise. I've had some biblio adventures that just filled me with joy. One of them was I met a very special person for coffee last Sunday. It was the Saskatoon writer and my former English prof, David Carpenter. I will not be disclosing very much of what we talked about because it was an off-the-record visit, but I did feel Dave out for coming on the channel sometime, so stay tuned. I'm hoping that might work out. But we had an absolutely delightful chat, reminiscing about the good old days back in the late 80s, early 90s when I knew him, all the many, many books he's published and people we both knew, professors and so on. It was just absolutely, I was stimulated up to my nipples. And we met at a cafe that I hadn't been to since the early 90s. It's changed names and hands many times, called Delish, and it is the artsiest, fartsiest cafe, bar none, in Saskatoon. I wish to heck I lived closer to it, because it's the one cafe in Saskatoon that has the kind of ambience I'm used to in cafes in big cities like Tokyo, Toronto, Vancouver. I just loved the vibe there, so I'm going to be going back there many times. He told me that the English department back in the day, probably in the 80s, I'm not sure, maybe even the 70s actually, wanted to bring two of the preeminent, very male American writers of prose fiction up to do a reading or something. Raymond Carver and Richard Ford. Now, I hate Richard Ford's guts because of the fact that he spit in Colson Whitehead's face, but that happened after these events, so that's all I'll say about that. But David Carpenter offered, in lieu of if they would greatly reduce their speaking fees, that he would take them, I think, goose hunting or maybe duck hunting instead, and they jumped at the opportunity. So I said to David when he mentioned this, "Oh my God, have you written about this?" And he said, "I did. Next time we meet, I'll bring you the book and you can read it." So then I got home and I flipped through one of his essay collections that I had. I picked it up just recently. It was already signed when I bought it secondhand, and sure enough, that's where the essay is. It's called What We Talk About When We Talk About Carver, written in 1986, and so I have it. And I've actually started reading it to a dear friend who is awaiting cataract surgery. She can't do very much reading at the moment, so I'm reading this essay to her. So I've read the first third. It is hilarious and very, very interesting. I also got him to sign a couple books that I've had for years, haven't read, of his. This is his debut book, I believe, 2 novellas, Jokes for the Apocalypse. This was published in 1985, and he signed it that day. For Sean, fellow bookaholic. And then this one came out just a couple years later, I believe, a short story collection, God's Bedfellows, by David Carpenter, 1988. For Sean, who returned to Saskatoon, well done. Well done, I hope so. So that was incredible. And then on Tuesday, I had to be on campus for other reasons, and it worked out perfectly that I could attend a rescheduled poetry reading, because when it had to, the original date it was set for, I couldn't go or something. A reading by Saskatchewan's fairly new poet laureate. I didn't even know until recently that Saskatchewan had a poet laureate, and the poet laureate is somebody that I'd met recently, Hobsbawn-Smith, and she is wonderful. I talked about her in connection with the book launch that was a posthumous book launch, Colleen Gerwing's novel, The School of the Haunted River, I believe. Here's the cover gift. I went to that launch, and D. Hobsbawn-Smith had worked with the writer, who sadly is no longer with us, Colleen Gerwing, when Dee was the writer-in-residence at the Saskatoon Public Library, and then after Colleen's death, she made some very light edits to get it ready for publication, and she was at that book launch. And I spoke to her. She was delightful, and I approached her about having her come on my channel. And so when I saw her this past Tuesday, I reminded her of that. And she said, yes, please send me another email. We'll keep talking about it. And that poetry reading was hosted by Jeanette Lynes. And I met Jeanette Lynes. This is also getting so incestuous. I met Jeanette Lynes the first time at David Carpenter's book launch a year ago, which is the beginning of all this stuff. And I talked so effusively about all of that. And had sent her a couple of messages on Instagram, but I didn't know whether anything would come of it in terms of interviewing her or whatever. But she's an English prof and a novelist. Her novel, The Apothecary's Daughter, was on some prize list or other a year or two ago. Women's Prize or Giller? Can't remember. But she's lovely. And, it had been over a year since I'd seen her. And I walked in to the classroom before the reading started. And she kind of looked at me. She said, are you Sean the Bookman? I said, yes, that's me. And she said, are you still doing it? I said, yes, I'd love to have you come on my channel someday. She said, and I said I'd send her some messages, some of which she hadn't seen. She said, send me an email, we'll talk. And I was just delighted to be remembered. I am not a poetry person, so I enjoyed hearing Dee read her poetry, but I'm much more interested in her prose fiction. And I recently bought her most recent novel. I'm not sure how many novels she's written, but this is called Danceland Diary. It came out last year, so she signed this the other day. Thank you for listening so closely. I hope I was listening closely. So that's the kind of bookish, biblio-adventure-ish week it's been. Oh, and in terms of personal news, the only personal news I have is that I was absolutely devastated to hear of Matthew Perry's tragic death. I am not a TV watcher, but one of the few exceptions is Friends, and I didn't watch Friends when it was on TV because I wasn't watching TV in the 90s and early aughts, but I became an ESL teacher starting in 2009, and in particular my Asian students. I taught for 2 or 3 years in Vancouver, and it was my Korean students in particular, and maybe also my Japanese students, that really wanted to study English by watching Friends, and I didn't know why, but I brought the VCR and the TV into class, and we watched some episodes, and that's what got me hooked on it. And it is great for studying English. And then Kenji was interested in it, and in the first 2 or 3 years of our marriage, Kenji and I watched on Netflix in Tokyo. We watched all 10 seasons and just fell in love with it. And Kenji is a wonderful mimic, and so he loved imitating some of the characters, especially Janet, or was it Janice? Chandler, Matthew Perry's on again, off again girlfriend. Part of the cement of our marriage was watching Friends together, and I'm looking forward to, if he's interested, watching it again after he gets here. No new information on that, but hopefully soon. So really, Matthew, the cast were all incredibly talented, and there was just something about Matthew Perry that was a cut above. I mean, he really made the show. And, had struggled with getting off drugs and alcohol, and he's written this memoir, which I haven't read, and has helped a lot of people. There's a video from a CBC radio interview he did last year where he said, when I die, I hope that the first line in my obituary is not about Friends, but about how I helped people that reached out to me to try and get off drugs and alcohol. So, in addition to being one of the funniest people alive, he was a great guy. So, rest in peace. I think that's all the news I have. Here is this week's mystery guest. Bernie of Bernie Lombardi fame over on Bookstagram. Hello.
Hi, Sean.
Welcome to my Friday Reads. You're this week's prestigious mystery guest.
Ooh, thank you.
So you have a Friday thing that you do every week, which is enigmatically called Fluffy Friday. What is that all about?
So basically, Friday's my day where I just post a fluff post, it doesn't have too much substance. I didn't really think that much about what I actually, I didn't really think too deeply about what I was going to post. It's more of I had a great week and this is what I'm doing this weekend. Tell me what you're doing. And then I post a picture.
Well, and no fluffers were involved in the preparation of these videos. I'm very disappointed.
I didn't say that.
Well, I think that usually the content of your Fluffy Friday posts are anything but fluffy, if you're defining them that way. They're kind of like your Friday Reads.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
You're halfway through North Woods is that by Daniel Mason?
Yes.
And how is that going?
It's really good. Sometimes the books that are so hyped, they don't always live up to what you're thinking. They're gonna live
really? I've never experienced that.
up. But this one is living up to it. I will say it's really good. In my Fluffy Friday post, I said that it kind of like it's giving me Washington Irving vibes, like, like early America, but also like it takes place in New England and like, upstate New York. It starts at an apple orchard. So it's like, but there's also like magical realist elements to it. That's fun. There are ghosts. The nature writing is really pretty. I don't know if you've read Braiding Sweetgrass, but she talks a lot about Robin Wall Kimmerer. Oh, you would love that book. I can't believe you haven't read that.
I know. I know.
That's a book you would love. But I'm like 100% confident. But anyway, she talks about a lot about kind of the relationship between humans and the earth. And, she talks a little bit about, when people die and what happens to their bodies and how it kind of like becomes a part of the earth. And so like, that's something that's in there as well. Along with a lot of really, really nice nature writing.
Probably about 20 years ago that he published a novel called The Piano Tuner, which I read sometime shortly thereafter. And I was underwhelmed, but I also probably was a very different reader. 20 years ago, I was only about 14, I think. That's a joke. And he may well have approved. It sounds like this might be his breakthrough book. I've never heard anybody get really excited, or I've never heard so many people get excited by a Daniel Mason novel as this one.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I think 2 years ago, his short story collection was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and that was like a surprise. Like I had never heard of him. Like nobody was talking about him. Nobody had heard about the book, and so then people were curious about it. But like still, not a lot of people read it after that. Kind of let it go away. But then this came out, and maybe just the publisher went hard on the marketing, but it's gotten a lot of great reception.
Shall we we've never had a fight, have we?
No.
I'm sure you've screamed at some of my videos, but you haven't screamed at me directly. Shall we have our first fight about Strangers on a Train, a book I hated passionately?
Well, I'm only on page 10. So
it's just not a Sean book. It's the complete opposite of a Sean book. It was beautifully written. I understand why people get excited by it. I just couldn't stand the story or the characters, and it just made me ill.
Got it.
But yeah, because I'm kind of, I'm a Pollyanna. That novel was not Pollyanna-ish.
Yeah, I know. So far, I'm just intrigued by the dynamic between those two characters. One of them's name is Guy. I forget the other one's name. That's how I've been reading it at night before bed and falling asleep. Not because I don't like it, just because I've been tired. But I find the way that she like is setting their dynamic up is really interesting and kind of like low-key homoerotic. I don't know, like it very much feels like they're like courting, and I find that interesting.
You would. I remember the psychological hotness, the tension. Yeah. I think my Goodreads review of this book was, I wish halfway through I'd gone up to a stranger in a train and asked them to kill me so I wouldn't have had to finish this goddamn novel. And you're a new uncle.
Yes. Very exciting.
You have a Halloween baby named Jack.
Mm-hmm.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. He lives right downstairs in our apartment. So that's exciting.
Yeah, how fabulous. And Booker winners coming soon?
Yes.
And you're calling it for who do you want to win?
The Beasting.
Yeah, no, you're the one that really put that on my radar. I'm hoping to start reading it in January, so I'm hoping it wins too.
Yeah, and then my dark horse is to Study for Obedience.
And I have been sold probably by you and certainly my friend Lindy on giving that one a try, despite the fact that Eric Carl Anderson, or perhaps because of the fact that Eric Carl Anderson couldn't finish it. He so rarely bails on anything. Oh, tell us about your African Lit read-along.
Oh, yeah. It's going well. Well, it's gone well.
Has it started?
No, sorry. No.
The
I meant like
series.
throughout the year, because this is my fourth in like an installment. And so the final read along is Binyavanga Wainaina's One Day I'll Write About This Place, which is a memoir, and it starts in November. Hold on, let me look. November 19th. Yep. And we're going to read it for 2 weeks. It's about 20 pages a week. If anybody's interested, just comment on the post where I introduce it, and I will add you to the group chat when I make it. But yeah, it's really great. These read-alongs, it's just a bunch of people who are reading the same book and chatting about it. You can read at your own pace. The only thing is, if you like the page, I like set a certain amount of chapters for each day. And so just to like avoid spoilers, I say
check in ahead of the schedule. Behind schedule is fine.
Behind schedule is fine, yeah. But if you read ahead, just only talk up to, the certain point that's assigned for the day.
You and I had either one of the bite-sized book chats we had was about that. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes if people want to get more of a sense of the book. But give us an elevator pitch for the book.
It is really mainly focused on his coming of age, his childhood into his like early adult years, and like coming into himself. But like on the backdrop is also like the quote unquote coming of age of post-colonial Kenya. It's kind of like he's obviously doing that intentionally and like positioning himself within that society, but also like in ways against it. And then at the end, we're going to read a short essay that he wrote called I'm a Homosexual Mom, where he like imagines coming out to his mom, but he doesn't get to while his mom is still alive. So this is like an imagining, and he calls it the lost chapter to this memoir. Yes. Because in the memoir, there's no mention of his sexuality. But like, if you see this, if you read this and like realize, that he does identify as homosexual eventually, the book, the memoir becomes very queer, which is really interesting.
Well, I hope to have cleared some of the 44 books I'm currently reading off my plate so I can join you.
Yes. That's another book that I think you'd love.
Oh, yeah. You sold it on me when we had that chat. So unlike me, it takes me all day. I'm about to film my Friday reads, and then it takes me most of the day to edit it. You get your Fluffy Fridays out first thing. So now what are you going to do with the rest of your day, Bernie?
I have some work to do. I have to go run some errands, and then my husband, Chris, his parents and sister are coming to visit from Tennessee, and they get in tonight. So he's going to go pick them up at the airport, and this is their first time seeing our new place and hanging out in our new town because we moved recently, for those who don't know.
How fabulous. And let's close with this. There's a lovely portrait of you and your husband on the wall done by another famous bookstagrammer, is there not?
Yes. I'll show you. Hold on.
Aw, that is fantastic. Oh, I just love that.
By the famous Shelf by Shelf.
Shelf by Shelf, aka Hunter.
Yes.
I had filmed a really wide-ranging, unclassifiable chat with Hunter the other day. I think the title of it's going to be Hunter of Shelf by Shelf Queers Florida. Everything about Florida is queer.
That's fun.
A fun one.
And ironic.
Yes. Speaking of fun, Bernie, this was great. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Have a great day.
You too.
Oh, Bernie, we talked offline about a book that we mutually bailed on this week. Stay tuned for that. But first, here is the Week in Review, which I even forgot to do last week, but there was only one video that I did talk about, but quite a bit more activity on my channel this week. I think the only Goodreads gamification championship I can claim in a head-to-head with Bob the Booker is that I'm probably currently reading more books than you. I'm at 44. How about you?
In fairness, mine, there are some that I need to take off mine because it's basically like I've read them, but I just haven't written the NetGalley review for them yet, so they're still up. But I think it says 20. In reality, that's 4.
Well, so I am the champion. All right,
there we go.
Every other category I concede, but
your way stresses me out quite a lot. Sean, in some ways I feel like you exist as sort of a man of mystery, because it's like, what is Sean actually reading right now? Is it one of these 44? Is it something else?
It would have been, to me, a shame, a great loss, if he had succumbed to the stupor and not spoken to the frog.
And how did you get on with YN Esther Yee?
YN by Esther Yee. I just finished it not 10 minutes ago, but maybe about an hour and a half ago. Well, I really enjoyed it. It's not a Sean book, but I couldn't put it down. So, this week, I've got quite a bit to tell you about. I have one bale, and I finished 2. And I'm going to start a bunch. Oh, actually, in a sense, I've finished 3. There's one I finished a long time ago that I didn't wrap. I'm going to wrap up finally here today. Stay tuned. But can anybody guess what my bale is? One commenter from last week's Friday Reads will be mad at me, but hopefully she and I can patch up our differences. I absolutely loathed this book, The Most Secret Memory of Men, by Mohamed Mbougar Sarr, translated from the French by Lara Verneau. It just is not a Sean book. So my Goodreads review, I think I can quote in full. This read like a barfy, shouty, post-colonial cross between the 2 worst books ever published, The Alchemist and The Da Vinci Code. I bailed in disgust on page 137. Now, I am in a very, very tiny minority, but I can include Bernie, as he bailed too. I said, I enabled you when I checked in with you about your feelings on this book last week, didn't I? And he said, yeah, kinda. Jo is enjoying it. She's going to continue. Bertie was buddy reading it with another Bookstagrammer. She's going to continue. If you go on to Goodreads, it's got like one of the highest ratings of any book out this year. So our opinions, however correct they may be, are a distinct minority. You should still check it out, but I hated it passionately. Here's another minority opinion. I'm going to wrap up Pearl by Sean Hughes here. This was supposed to be a pseudo-buddy read between myself and Alex, a wonderful former booktuber and host of the Hamilton Review of Books book podcast. And he's been on my bite-sized book chats many times. He's one of my patrons. He's a really great, big reader, especially of prize lists. And I chose this off the Booker long list to buddy read with him. And then life just got in the way. I got COVID just the week that we were scheduled. I think I think it might have been his work schedule. We put it off for another week, and then I got COVID. And by the time I kind of came up for air, he was back into another busy thing. And I said, should we just let it go? Because we'd both have to basically spend hours paging through the book to remember why we thought what we thought. And he said, yeah, let's just let it go. The universe conspired against us having a Zoom chat about it. So here I am to tell you that I didn't like this novel. It was a 3-star read. There were things I liked about it, but I thought the writing was bad and the story was pretty stupid. How's that for in-depth analysis? It kept me with it until the protagonist takes her girlfriend to the former house where her mother that she used to live in, and it was kind of treated like a haunted house, and that scene was so stupid, so genre fiction bullshit, just ridiculous, that I never could really get back into the story after that. I just thought it was a hot mess. Certainly evidence of some talent. I didn't hate this book. It was not a 1-star book, but it was so incredibly mediocre from my perspective that I gave it 3 stars. Again, I'm in the minority. Bernie loved it. Lots of other people. Alex liked it, at least. I think he gave it 4 stars, and his 4 stars is a lot higher than my 3-star. So don't let my negative opinion influence you overly much. And if you're one of that distinct minority of my viewers who only read what I don't like, this is one you should pick up. But I thought it was pretty much a waste of time. It's all happiness from here on in, folks. I finished that French novel that's set in Nigeria. The author is not of Algerian heritage. Tomorrow They Won't Dare to Murder Us by Joseph Andras. Translated from the French by Simon Lesser. And I loved it. I mean, it's a tough story. It is based on the true story of a French national who lived most of his life in Algerian but had no Algerian heritage, who becomes part of the resistance movement and the independence movement in Algeria. I don't have his name in front of me, but it's based on a true story, but it's the literary treatment makes it a really rewarding, and unless you're really a student of the Algerian Revolution and all that, you won't have heard of this guy. But the fact that it's based on a true story, the author, Joseph Andras, does so much with it in the structure and the literary treatment of it that it was, despite it being a very tough story and a very sad story, because he was executed. He was the only French national to be executed for participating in the Algerian resistance. And it's sad. It's gruesome. There's a long scenes of chapters that describe the torture that he endured. And then this really kind of sweet backstory about how he met his wife, this Polish wife. And then that's tragic because you know that this story isn't going to end well. I thought it was a masterful work of literature. I recommend it to you very highly. It was so much better and resonated with me so much more powerfully than the Doctorow novel that I talked to Scott Nell about, but with similar themes. I think Scott Nell would love this, by the way, if you're listening. And Joseph Andras, he won, I think, the Prix Goncourt, and he refused to accept it, so he is himself a rebel, and I'm really intrigued by him. I'd like to read more by this writer. But I'm even more passionate about Sharon Butala's memoir, The Perfection of the Morning. It's one of the best books I've read this year. I loved it with all my heart. I immediately dashed off an email to Sharon, who I had on my channel this spring, I think it was, to tell her how much I loved it. There might be a video discussion coming down the pipe. This was a buddy read with Heidi. Maybe Heidi didn't connect with the second half as much as I did. There's a long chapter. There's quite a bit about her dreams that influenced her development as a writer and that reflected her becoming a rural woman after spending a lifetime living in the city. And I don't love reading about dreams, but she showed it in a way that was so personal to her, like it wasn't preachy, that you need to analyze your dreams from a Jungian perspective. Just because Sharon Butala did it doesn't come across, at least it didn't to me, like that's what she was saying, but she did really delve into dream work. This memoir was so incredibly powerful that I can kind of close my eyes and just step into Sharon Butala going for a walk on the grasslands around her ranch. And such a personal read for me that it has actually situated me more firmly as a prairie person. I just loved it. So that's what I've finished or bailed upon. What am I going to start? Well, I got some buddy reads long ago committed to that I'm really excited about starting. And these probably might be some of the last books I start this year. I've got one more buddy read commitment, and I'm going to try to finish a bunch of stuff that you haven't heard me talk about that I'm supposedly currently reading in December, but I don't think I'm going to start a whole bunch more this year. These I'm very excited about. Heidi and I are buddy reading Thomas King's, one of his most recent novels. I think he's so prolific. I don't think it's his most recent one. Indians on Vacation. It came out in 2020. I know he's written some mystery novels or something since then. I've been wanting to read this book since it came out. I heard him interviewed by Sheila Rogers about it when it came out. This is my mom's copy. My mom doesn't keep her books particularly, so it's now my copy, and I'm finally going to read it. Thomas King is a Canadian writer who writes a lot about Indigenous characters and writes fiction and nonfiction about Indigenous life and politics. He is an amazing writer. This one is quite whimsical, and I'm looking forward to some whimsy. One of my bibliophile bestie patrons, Robin, who's been on my channel many times on Bite Size Book Chats, she and I are buddy reading a book. She chose a buddy read as one of her benefits, and we're buddy reading this Canadian historical novel, In the Upper Country, by Kai Thomas. This is quite new. I'm reading a library copy. If I love the novel, I'll buy a copy later. Yeah, it just came out this year, and it's set in the 1800s in a town, probably in Upper Canada, that's settled by people who have fled enslavement in the American South and come up to Canada via the Underground Railroad, and it's supposed to be amazing. I haven't heard anything but good reviews of this, so I'm looking forward to diving in with Robin. And finally, my friend Leah and I are reading our annual Elizabeth Jane Howard. We're reading her in publication order. We did start with her second novel, loved it so much we went back to the first one, and then we've been reading chronologically ever since. So the next one in line is After Julius. It was published, I think 1965. I can't read that tiny print, but something like that. And I have not read one of her books that I didn't absolutely love, so I'm expecting I'm going to love this one too. It's set 20 years after the titular hero dies. Some of the main characters are his youngest daughter and his sister. And his widow. And plot ensues. I don't want to know another darn thing about it until I dive in. So that's what I've got for you this week. Have you got anything for me this week? Comments below, always welcome. Thanks for watching.